Hi everyone, Ian here from the Media Center, and in today's video I'll be showing you how I set up, lit and shot my B-roll product commercial. If you haven't already seen it, here it is now. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that. I really enjoyed making it. So I'm going to be taking you through the lighting setup for some of the key points within the commercial. So before I look at the lighting setup, which I have behind me, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the camera settings that I used for the majority of it as well. So I was shooting with the Sony a7S Mark III. This is a full frame camera. And I was shooting at 50 frames per second in 422 10-bit in 4K. I was using an aperture of around about f5.6 to f8. I didn't want a really shallow depth of field because we are doing a commercial and we want the product to be in focus at all time. I was shooting with an ISO range of somewhere between 400 ISO to 800 ISO a lot of the time. Sometimes I'd drop down to 200 ISO and sometimes I'd go up to 1600 ISO if I was shooting at 100 frames a second. But as I say, for the majority of it, I was shooting at 50 frames because then I can speed it up or slow it down in post-production. My shutter was 1/100th of a second for the majority of my shots because I was shooting at 50 frames and I wanted that natural motion blur. And finally, I was also shooting in S-Cinetone as opposed to Sony S-Log. I was doing that because I can control the majority of the lighting within this scene, and S-Cinetone has around 11 stops of dynamic range, which is plenty of range for the type of lighting that I'm doing. I didn't need to use S-Log because I didn't need that additional dynamic range, and that would have meant longer in post-production to correct it. And it could also increase the potential noise and grain in the shot, especially because there is quite a lot of darker points within the frame with the commercial because of the types of colors that I'm using. So it was a very conscientious decision to shoot in S-Cinetone. You don't always need to shoot in S-Log, especially with the Sony cameras. I was also using a 70-200 Canon L-glass lens, which I've got on a Metabones to adapt to the Sony. I quite like shooting products with a 70-200. It gives me nice range, and I just like the way 100mm normally looks. I'd either be using something like a telephoto or I'd be using a wide lens if I needed to get very close to the subject for specific types of shots. So sometimes like a 35. I tend to prefer 35mm as opposed to 50mm. So that's what I had with the camera setup. And then we have the lighting. So I'm going to turn on the lighting at each different point so you can see how it's affected on the screen, and I'm recording on the camera currently, so I'll be able to cut to that as I'm talking. So we're using the Blue Moon beer, which has a nice blue and a nice warm orange tone, and I wanted to complement that with the backdrop. So I'm using a blue backdrop, but because of the name Blue Moon, I also wanted to complement the aesthetics of the backdrop as well. So I decided that I wanted a circle around on the backdrop and I wanted it to be in a richer blue color to really stand out. So because of that, I've used a Dado 150 light with an iris imager lens, and I've put an iris adjustment in the middle of it. So when I turn this on, you'll see that it creates a nice rich blue circle. I've also got a gobo inserted as well, and this has got a blue theatrical gel placed in it, and that's giving me that nice rich blue tone. I also wanted to light from the back as well. So when you're lighting glass bottles, it's quite important to light from behind because bottles have a lot of reflection. And if you're lighting just primarily from the front, you are going to get some quite harsh reflections, especially depending on the type of soft boxes or diffusion or hard light that you utilize at the front. So I'm going to turn on the backlights first to show you how it affects it. I've got two tube lights at the side, and when I turn these on, you'll see that it creates a nice highlight, a nice rim around the edge of the glass. And you want to have these at a specific height so it encompasses the entirety of the glass. You'll see that as I lift these up and down, it will adjust how the light is sitting on the side of the glass. And this just creates some nice rim light. It helps separate the bottle from the background. I've got these set at 5600 Kelvin, and my camera is also recording at 5600 Kelvin as well. I've then got a Aputure 60X at the back, and this is going to be used to illuminate the back of the bottle. And because the bottle is clear, that light source is going to go through the back of the bottle, and it's going to illuminate the nice rich amber color of both the beer, but also of that deep dark bottle color as well. So I'm going to turn this on, and you'll see that will now illuminate it there. And if I loosen this, I can turn it, and you'll see as I do so, it adjusts how it's affecting the bottle at the front. Now, I've also just closed off the light source as well with some barn doors to make sure that it's focusing specifically on the back of the bottle. And we can already see that we're getting quite a nice image from that. Now, I also have a third tube light on a C-stand, and this is going to illuminate just the top of the bottle. And again, it's just going to create a nice rim light at the top to help it stand out, and it's just going to illuminate the cap. So when I come to do some top-down shots later on, I can also get nice exposure on that. I'm using a C-stand with this, and we've just got some sandbags on it to weight it down. Everything's powered in here because this shoot has taken me a few days, so I didn't want to run out of battery life. So whenever you can mains power stuff with product videography, when you're in a controlled environment, it's best to do so. So we can already see that we're getting a nice shot with that. But then we can also light from the front as well. Now you'll see on here that I've got an Aputure 300X, and I've got a big rectangular diffusion or an oval diffusion sheet at the front of it. This is to create a light source that's going to be more of a line going down the bottle, as opposed to if I was using something like a softbox, you'd see a round circular reflection. And I'll be able to show that in a minute when I turn on this Light Dome Mini, which is sitting on top of this C-stand on another 60X. So I made a conscientious decision that I wanted this to be a line of light going down. And I didn't want just hard light because it was going to be very sharp on the bottle. And I'll show you the difference if I remove this and I turn this light source on. We'll see that we get quite a harsh light source. It's still a straight line, but it's a hard light source coming down. Now I wanted that to be slightly softer. So when I add a diffusion sheet to it, it's just gonna soften that light source a little bit and create a more gradual gradation. Now I'll show you on screen now the difference when I use a softbox, and the difference when I use a diffusion sheet, and the difference when you have just a hard light source hitting. But I can also show you with this top-down light source as well. And when I turn this on, we'll see that we have a hard light source appearing on the edge of the bottle, and it doesn't particularly look very flattering. So sometimes it can be quite difficult to shoot bottles from the top, so it can be difficult to light them from the top. So as I said before, you want to light them from the back, and if you are lighting them from the front, you want to use a very soft diffusion, and you also want to use either strip lights or long rectangular diffusion sheets. If you want to control it even more, you can also use some black flags as well to block off where the light is hitting. The final light source that I have, and I'll just turn this one off, is I've got a darker side on this bottle and I want the lighting to be a bit more even on both sides. So again, I have another Dado 150 here with another iris imager. So this lens imager on the front. And with this, I wanted to specifically pinpoint just the logo on the bottle. So to do that, I have these little pieces of metal that can just go inside the lens. So there's a little portion here which allows me to control how much light is coming in and out. And when I turn this on, these are already inserted. As I open and close these, you'll see that the light begins to adjust on the logo and where the light is hitting. And so I'm using this just to create a little bit of additional light. Now, if I open them up or remove them, it's going to increase the light on the glass bottle and I could be getting some additional reflections, which you don't always necessarily want. So it gives me the option to control the light a little bit more. And I just have a scrim in the gobo holder as well, just to diffuse it a little bit so the light isn't as harsh. This is a 3200 Kelvin light source, as opposed to the 5600 of the 300X and of the tube lights, just to create a nice warmer glow on the side of the bottle. And then the light which is shining through the bottle is also set to 3200 to accentuate that warm, rich amber color of the bottle and of the beer inside it. So depending on how you have the light set up will drastically alter what the image looks like. So on screen now, I'll just show you some additional shots with different lights turned on and off to see how it drastically alters and changes the overall product in the frame. So do think about your lighting because it is really, really important. A trick that you can use when lighting bottles is to remove the label at the back of the bottle. So when the light is shining at it, it can shine completely through, and that's going to help illuminate part of the logo on the front of the bottle, and it will also help illuminate the beer inside it as well. You can also adjust the intensity of the light source coming through and the gradient, so the softness of that light source coming through, by adding a diffusion sheet to the back of the bottle as well. So here I just have a diffusion sheet. I've cut it out in the shape of the bottle, and then I'd place it on the back of the bottle. You'd want to make sure that it wasn't visible on the camera. And that's just going to create a smoother gradient coming through from that back light source. So that can be really useful to utilize. Now, if you are using a Lazy Susan, so a turntable, and the bottle or the product is rotating 360 degrees, then you're probably not going to be able to add that diffusion sheet because you wouldn't want to see it in the frame. But if you've just got a still shot, such as a hero shot, for example, then it can be really useful to utilize. The final thing that you can also add is some water to the product to make it look cold. However, the problem with water is that it will evaporate quite quickly and it tends to not stick to the bottle, which means it will drip down very quickly quite often. So something that you can add to water is glycerin, and that's going to help it stick to the bottle for longer periods of time and not evaporate. So normally what I'll do is just stand a foot away or so, and you just want to spray it across the product. And you just want to cover the entire product, especially if you are on a turntable and a Lazy Susan and you want that 360 degree rotation. You want an even spread of that glycerin and water across the product. And it's just going to make the product look nice and cold, and it's really going to elevate that product in your shot. Okay, so that's how I lit the bottle portion of the commercial. For the can, I had pretty much the same setup. In terms of where the lights were positioned, I just altered a few of the different intensities and utilized some of the lights a little differently. So my lens is now on nearly 200 ml because the can is smaller than the bottle, and I wanted to get as close to the can as possible, getting the full can in shot. But I've also made sure to leave a little bit of a gap between the top of the screen and the bottom of the screen, because then I can keyframe in post-production, and especially if the Lazy Susan is turned on and rotating, I can do keyframes in many different axes as well, and that's going to help add some creative movement, especially because I'm doing this on my own, so it's harder for me to physically move the can, so some of that will be done in post-production. I've got the water and glycerin added again to the can to make it feel cold, and I've still got the Dado 150 on, giving a warm hue as our fill light. I also still have on the Aputure 300X, however I have the intensity set to much lower, because you'll see as I increase the intensity, it's gonna make a hard line start to appear on the can itself, and that's gonna distract from the Blue Moon logo. So I want that turned down, so it's just adding a little bit of additional light. And then finally, I do have the Light Dome Mini and the Aputure 60X turned on at the top as well, because we're not gonna get those same reflections that we get with a glass bottle because it's a metallic can. So I'm able to light from above. We're not gonna get that round spot coming through from the light source. And that's just adding quite a lot of additional light from above and really highlighting the Blue Moon label at the top and the cream color of the can. I've still got the tube lights turned on. However, these two aren't really massively necessary. It's just adding an additional little bit of light. I quite like the effect, so I have decided to keep them turned on. And then the tube light at the top, I've turned to an RGB warm orange hue, just to give a little bit of additional warmth to the table. And it's just adding a little bit of warmth to the top of the can as well. That also means if I get closer in to shoot specifically just the top of the can as well, we're gonna get that nice warm hue. And then finally, I've turned off the 60X at the back because we haven't got glass, the light can't shine through, so it doesn't need to be on at this point. But the blue gel is still creating that Blue Moon effect at the back. Okay, so for the next shot, it's going to be a top-down shot. And so for this, I'm using again the Sony a7S Mark III, and I've got it on a C-stand facing downwards onto the product. The C-stand also has an additional magic arm attached, which is going to help create a bit more stability and stop some of the shaking and vibrations occurring. I've got a HDMI connected to a TV screen, and that's going to allow me to see what I'm doing more easily. And I've got a safety chain as well, so if the camera and lens did fall, hopefully it wouldn't get damaged and broken. It's connected by a spigot in between the gobo head and the camera. And I've also got some additional things to help dress the set that should work quite nicely with the type of product that I'm shooting. So the primary one is going to be some oranges, because Blue Moon does have orange peel in the drink. So I've just cut up some oranges, and I'm going to start just placing them around the glass to try and see just how they lay and how they fall and what it looks like on screen, if it looks nice. I've got just different types of segments cut up to add a bit of variety to the overall shot. And once I've put them in place, I'm just going to have a look at them via the TV, see if I'm happy with them. So I feel like these could maybe go a little bit more over this way. I could build this out a little bit, bring these in a little bit here, space some of these out a little bit more. That's looking quite nice at the moment. Okay, so once I've got that, I'm also going to add some additional things. I'm going to add a pestle and mortar, because Blue Moon has some coriander flavors in it, so I just kind of want that as an accent on the side of the shot. And then just a bit of greenery to add a bit of additional color. And this is also going to help hide the Lazy Susan turntable cable. and that's just going to go on the side here. So it just breaks everything up a little bit. It adds a bit of color and contrast to it. Now I'm also going to get my focus correct as well. So currently the focus is kind of towards the top of the shot, but ideally I want it closer to the ground because I also want the oranges in focus. So now we can see that they're in focus. The bottom of the glass is also in focus, which means when that beer is poured, the bubbles should also be in focus as well. I am shooting at an f8, so hopefully those bubbles, even when they rise, should still be in focus for the majority of the shot. Because it's on a Lazy Susan as well, it means that I can turn it on, and as the whole thing turns, I'll be able to then keyframe in post-production. So I'll have the turning, the physical turning of the Lazy Susan mixed with the digital rotation or digital keyframing in and out in post-production. So it gives me different types of movement that I can utilize. So in addition to this as well, in terms of the lighting setup, not much has really changed. I've still got the 60x above turned on, and that's creating the majority of the light source coming down onto here. If I turn it on and off, you'll see how it affects the image. So it's just creating some light on the side. I've also still got the 300x turned on. Again, it's just creating that even lighting across all the different sides of the product. And then I've still got my tube lights on, again, just to provide a bit of accent lighting. These are all set to 5600 Kelvin, as is my camera. And then I've still got on my 60x down here. It's still pointing at the glass, and this is just creating a little bit of additional light on the glass itself. This is at 3200, just to kind of add a bit of additional warmth and glow to the overall image and to the oranges as well. Okay, so for this shot, I'll be showing you how I got that initial slider shot in the commercial. So for that, I'm using the iFootage Nano Shark slider, and I've got the Laowa probe lens on here as well. So I've set it up with two tube lights at the back in a blue color to complement the bottles and the cans. I've got three products spaced out between, so 2 cans and 1 bottle. And then I've got the probe lens going directly in between all of them. I've set up my starting and end points on the slider. It's an electronic slider, not a manual slider. So when I press my standby procedure to take me to my first point, it's going to take me directly to that bottle at the back, and it's completely up against it, so the image is going to look dark on the screen. And then I've set it for about 20 seconds, and then in post-production I'm going to use speed ramps to speed up and slow down certain portions. Again, I'm filming at 50 frames per second in 4K. So when I hit start, it's going to take those 20 seconds. It's going to come backwards, reveal that initial can. It's then going to reveal the bottle on the left-hand side. And then finally, it will reveal the third can on the right-hand side and then come to a stop. Lighting-wise, we have our 60x still turned on, just creating some additional light. Because this is an f14 aperture, I've had to boost my ISO up quite a lot. And I've also brought the 300x out from the diffusion sheet to just give a little bit of hard light on the cans. I still have the light at the back, the 60x shining towards it just to create a little bit of a glow from behind, but the main glow is going to be coming from those two tube lights, which, as I say, are just complementing the blue color of the cans and the bottles logos. This top light is also just creating a little bit of additional light on the wooden base, and then I've just got a little aperture light to the side just to shine a little bit of a warm hue coming onto the bottle, which will help just illuminate the amber color of the beer inside it. Okay, so for the water tank shot, in which I got the oranges dropping into water slowing down and then speeding up again, I used a pretty simple setup. So I've removed a lot of the lights out of the shot, and I've just got the 60x above, which is bringing the light down from the top. And then I've got two Filoni panels at the side, just shining light directly in. You want to make sure that the backdrop is quite far away and that any light is angled towards the tank and not angled towards the back, because you don't want any additional light spreading onto there. And then I've cut up 3 oranges just into little slices. And before I drop them, I've set my camera to manual focus. I'm just going to place it into the center, and then I'm just going to make sure that I've got it focused up correctly. You want to make sure it's round about in the middle. So with my camera settings, I've got my aperture set at f8 so I can get the majority of the image in focus, especially as the oranges are going to be falling into the water and moving within the water when they hit it. I've got my ISO quite low at 200 to try and reduce the noise and grain, and I'm shooting at 100 frames a second so I can slow it down a lot in post-production. You could choose to either have your shutter at 1/200th of a second. That's going to make the oranges slightly sharper as they fall in because there'll be less motion blur. However, I'm going to keep mine at 1/100th of a second because it's going to create slightly more motion blur. And when I've been testing this, I personally just like the look of a slightly more dreamlike effect, more motion blur as it drops in. I think it works quite nicely for the type of shot that I want to create. So I've got that recording. So I'm just going to place these in the middle. I'm going to try and hold them a little bit apart. And I'm just going to throw them down, and I'm going to chuck them quite hard because I want them to go all the way down to the bottom, and then they're going to come back up because oranges will float when you throw them into water. So you are going to get quite a bit of splashback on either side, so just make sure if you are using lights that you clean it up straight away so you don't damage the lights and they don't cut out. I've also got the tank as a slightly wider shot because in post-production I'm going to be zooming in to the middle portion where the oranges are going to drop. So I don't mind that there's a bit of excess light showing on either side, and I don't mind that I can see the ridge line of the water in the shot either because I know I'm going to be cropping in. I also want to see that ridge line because I want to see the splash occur as the oranges fall in. So I'm going to hold them over. I'm recording, so I'm going to hold them upright because I want them to drop downwards and then try and curl back up. So in 3, 2, 1. You can see that's made quite a bit of a splashback, so I'm going to want to clean that up pretty quickly. But I was pretty happy with that shot. I'll play it back now in the camera so we can have a look. And I think that one will turn out quite nicely. Once I've done that, I'd want to clean up the water, so any excess bits that are maybe floating in there, let them sink to the bottom, or you can use a sieve to get some of those out, and then repeat the process 3 or 4 times. Go and watch them back in your editing software before you pack down, just to make sure that you're happy with the shot. And then yeah, it's into post-production to try and slow that down. And here's what it looks like slowed down in post. For the green screen portion of the commercial, I'm going to be filming orange slices and the bottle cap from the Blue Moon beer, and then I'll be removing the green screen in post-production and replacing it with a different background. So for the lighting setup, I have the Aputure 300X with a lantern, and that's its main key light. And then I've got 2 tube lights on either side for some additional fill, all of which are set to 5600 Kelvin. Then for the orange slice, I've got a 300X with the diffusion sheet, and then I've got the 60X with the Light Dome Mini, providing the light from above. I've also got a small little aperture light to the side, and when this is turned on, it's going to create some additional fill for the skewer, which is holding the orange slice in place, and that's going to make it easier to remove the skewer in post-production when we're chroma keying it out. I'm going to be using the Roto Brush tool in After Effects to remove the orange slice from the background, and then I'll be creating digital movement in post-production. The orange slice is connected or sitting on the Lazy Susan turntable, and it's sitting central on the turntable, so when it rotates, it doesn't go off its axis and move side to side. And it's just being held in place by some blue tack. So when this is turned on, we're gonna have the physical movement from the turntable, and then in post-production, we'll have the digital movement where we can either rotate it even more, or we can keyframe in and out. Something to try and remember when shooting product videography is shoot for the edit. So make sure you've got wider shots of all of your clips, because quite often you will want to keyframe and move in or move out of your shots to add some dynamicism, especially if you're shooting on your own and you can't physically move the object. So always think about those things when you're shooting. Also think about the resolution and aspect ratio that you want to film in, because you might be filming a commercial for social media, or you might be filming it for television. You also might be filming it for a US distribution, or a UK distribution, or a European distribution. And depending upon which country you're going to be going to will depend on the commercial's length, and it will depend potentially on the aspect ratio. And if you're going to social media, that will also be different as well. So try and think about the different parameters that you want to set when you're creating your commercial. For example, I'm going to show you now a 15-second clip which is designed for social media, as opposed to the original commercial that I shot that you saw at the beginning of the video. Cheers for watching, I hope you've enjoyed that. Keep being creative, and I'll see you soon.